There comes a point where the search itself becomes the distraction. You read more. You plan more. You ask more questions. You gather more strategies. And still, something feels unclear. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you've lost the habit of listening to what you already know. You second-guess yourself. You revisit the same doubts. You replay the same internal debate. And the real cost isn't confusion, it's delay. You postpone action while waiting for certainty. You hesitate while calling it research. You stay stuck while convincing yourself you're preparing. But if you're honest, the answer isn't missing. It's buried. Beneath the noise. Beneath the urgency. Beneath the pressure to get it perfect before you begin. It's not that you don't know what matters. It's that you've stopped creating the conditions to hear it clearly. Because truth isn't loud. Clarity isn't dramatic. And wisdom doesn't shout. It waits. It waits for you to stop chasing noise and return to stillness. That stillness isn't passive. It's not laziness. It's discipline. The discipline to pause, to observe, to reflect without rushing for the next opinion. But reflection is uncomfortable because it removes the excuse of not knowing. And without that excuse, what's left? Only responsibility. And that's what most people are avoiding, not answers, but ownership. Stephen Covey called it conscience, the quiet voice inside that already knows the path. Not the easy path, not the trendy one, but the right one. And it's not that we can't hear it. It's that we've layered over it with distraction, comparison, and constant motion. You open your phone before you open your day. You consume more than you contemplate. Task to task without asking, is this aligned with what I value most? And in that absence of reflection, doubt takes over. Not because you're weak, but because you're disconnected. Disconnected from your own center, from your own clarity, from your own ability to decide. So you ask more people. You seek more advice. You try to outsource certainty. But deep down, you know, no one else can answer this for you. Not fully. Not truly. Because the moment someone hands you their answer, you lose ownership of the process. You gain direction, maybe, but you trade away self-trust. And without self-trust, even the right path feels unstable. Because you didn't choose it, you adopted it. Covey warned us of this. That in a world filled with external scripts and reactive behavior, we risk becoming efficient at the wrong things. We move fast in the wrong direction. We work hard on the wrong foundation. We get busy and call it progress. But wisdom isn't in movement. It's in alignment. And alignment requires space. So what if the next step isn't about more learning, but more listening? Not to another voice, to your own. Because somewhere in you, the answer is already formed. You've known it in the quiet moments, in the calm after the noise, in that brief window between distraction and decision. It's not that you're unclear. It's that you're unpracticed at listening deeply. So pause, not to delay action, but to reconnect with it. Strip away the layers, quiet the inputs, and ask a better question. What truth have I been avoiding? Not because I don't see it, but because I don't want to carry what it demands. That's the turning point. And if you've reached it, if you're done pretending you need more information, if you're ready to lead from clarity, not noise, then take a breath. The search is over. It's time to listen. Ready to lead from within? Subscribe now, and let's walk this together. Most people don't lack answers. They lack access. Not because truth is complicated, but because life is loud. The world teaches you to seek, react, and perform. Rarely does it teach you to pause, observe, and choose. That's why so many smart, thoughtful people remain stuck. Not due to ignorance, but due to distraction. Stephen Covey warned us about this. He said the biggest threat to personal leadership isn't failure. It's reactivity. We react to urgency. We react to expectation. We react to pressure, internal and external, until our lives become scripted by everything but principle. And in that constant reaction, we drown out our inner compass. The voice that says, you already know. You've known for a while. You just haven't created the conditions to hear it. Because hearing your own clarity requires stillness, and stillness requires courage. It's easier to keep moving than to stop. Easier to keep researching than to reflect. Easier to ask others what to do than to sit with your own discomfort. But Covey didn't teach ease. He taught alignment. And alignment starts with responsibility. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose. That space isn't just philosophical. It's functional. It's where your character is shaped, where your decisions are formed, where your life is led or inherited. And most people skip it. They confuse speed with direction. They confuse motion with clarity. They confuse consumption with wisdom, but wisdom doesn't come from what you gather. It comes from what you integrate, and integration is only possible in stillness. That's why Covey placed such importance on conscience, not as morality, but as a source of internal guidance. He believed you were designed with the ability to sense what's right for you, not based on emotion, not based on popularity, but based on principle. And that sensing requires space, silence, listening, not to outside input, but to inner alignment. That's what makes this work so difficult for high performers. They've built momentum on output, but neglected the input of clarity. They've been praised for efficiency, but rarely questioned direction. They're so good at movement. They've forgotten how to be still with a decision long enough to own it. But the moment you pause and truly listen, the answer is almost always there. Simple, direct, quiet, not easy, but obvious. And here's the hard truth. The problem isn't that you don't know what to do. It's that doing it would cost something. It would require saying no, setting a boundary, making a decision, letting go, starting again. And so, you postpone. You say, I'm still thinking. You tell yourself, I need more clarity. But deep down, what you need is to act on what you already know. Without action becomes noise. And over time, that noise turns into self-doubt. You start to believe you're indecisive, when really, you're just unpracticed in choosing. Stephen Covey challenged that. He called us to return to the space between stimulus and response. To slow down, to reflect, and to lead from the inside by emotion, not by impulse, but by principle. So if the answer is already within you, the real question becomes, what am I avoiding by staying unclear? That's not weakness. That's information. And information, when met with honesty, becomes power. The power to stop seeking externally what you already hold internally. The power to lead not from reaction, but from reason. The power to reclaim your role, not just as a thinker, but as a decider. Because at the end of the day, clarity isn't found. It's accessed. And access requires intention. You don't need to become someone else. You need to return to the part of you that already knows. And trust it enough to listen. Stephen Covey believed that most people live lives of reaction, not creation. Not because they're weak, but because they're untrained in pausing. Untrained in reflection. Untrained in the simple, difficult act of listening to themselves before responding to the world. He called this the reactive life, when your choices are shaped more by the outside than the inside. You check your phone before you check your intention. You reply before you reflect. You perform before you pause. And you tell yourself you're being productive, when in truth, you're just being pulled. Pulled by urgency. Pulled by expectations. Pulled by old scripts that say, move fast, stay useful, stay busy. But usefulness isn't the same as purpose. And movement isn't the same as meaning. Covey warned us, if you don't decide what your life is centered on, the world will decide for you. That's why so many intelligent people live in quiet frustration. They feel capable. They feel motivated. But they feel lost. Not because they're missing information, but because they're missing clarity. Clarity doesn't come from activity. It comes from alignment. And alignment requires space. Not just in your schedule, in your mind. Space to stop reacting. To question the automatic response. To hear the quiet signal beneath the noise. Covey called this the victory. The foundational work that has to happen before anything meaningful can happen externally. But here's the problem. We've been conditioned to distrust silence. We mistake stillness for laziness. We mistake waiting for indecision. We mistake reflection for weakness. So we rush. We decide quickly, not because we're clear, but because we're uncomfortable with not knowing. And in that rush, we miss ourselves. We miss the part of us that already knows what matters. We miss the values that we're trying to speak. We miss the principle that was waiting to guide us. If only we had listened. Covey didn't teach people to do more. He taught them to pause more intentionally. Because every reaction you don't question becomes a pattern. And every pattern you don't observe becomes your life. Until one day you look up and realize you've been moving efficiently, productively, in the wrong direction. That's the quiet tragedy of reactivity. You don't feel it until the damage is already done. But the solution is simple. Not easy, but simple. Interrupt the pattern. Reclaim the pause. Return to your own voice. Because your conscience doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for your attention. It waits, patiently, for you to make space. Covey placed tremendous importance on that space. To him, it wasn't passive. It was strategic. Because in that space, You don't just find clarity, you recover authority. You stop outsourcing your decisions. You stop living as a reaction to others. You start leading yourself from the inside out. So if you've been reacting more than reflecting, if you've been moving more than listening, if you've been trying to prove instead of pausing to align, this is your opportunity to shift from reactivity to responsibility. Not responsibility for others, not for outcomes, but for your internal world. Because that's where your real power lives. Not in what you can achieve, but in what you can choose deliberately from principle. And that principle, it's already inside you. It doesn't need to be invented. It just needs to be remembered. And the remembering doesn't happen in motion. It happens in pause, in stillness, in reflection. Covey called it leadership of the self. And it begins with one question. What am I reacting to that I haven't yet paused long enough to lead? That question changes everything. Because you no longer pretend you're unclear. You realize clarity was never the issue. Presence was. And presence doesn't require answers. It requires attention. So give yourself that gift. Not more speed, more space, and watch what returns once you finally stop trying to hear more and start listening better. Is not a personality trait. It's a skill. And like any skill, it requires structure, repetition, and practice, not just good intentions. The modern world doesn't make this easy. You're surrounded by distraction, by demands, by devices and voices and algorithms constantly competing for your attention. And attention is not infinite. It's a resource, a precious one. Stephen Covey often spoke about first things first, organizing life around what truly matters, not what shouts the loudest. To do that, you need more than discipline. You need design. So how do you create the conditions to hear what you already know? Start here. 1. Schedule structured silence. Most people wait for peace to appear, but peace must be planned. Block 10 to 15 minutes daily for stillness. Put it on your calendar. Treat it like a non-negotiable meeting because it is. Sit somewhere quiet. No phone. No music. No input. This is not meditation for relaxation. It's stillness for recalibration. Your only goal is this. Listen. Let thoughts come. Let discomfort surface. And judge. The longer you sit, the more noise fades. And beneath that noise, clarity speaks. 2. Ask real questions. Self-reflection isn't just thinking. It's directed thinking guided by questions that reveal truth. Try these. What decision have I been postponing out of fear? What value have I been violating through my current habits? What would my wisest self say about this? What noise am I mistaking for clarity? What am I tolerating that's misaligned with who I want to be? Write the answers. Not to be poetic, to be honest. Because self-honesty is the foundation of self-leadership. And once it's on paper, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. 3. Design a personal clarity system. Covey taught that effective people don't just act on priorities, they live from them. So create a system that makes your values visible. Use a decision filter. Every time you face a choice, ask, does this align with my principles, or am I reacting out of pressure? If the answer is unclear, pause. Don't rush. The pause itself is a decision. You don't need to say yes immediately. You need to say yes intentionally. And if that means sitting with discomfort, let it come. Because discomfort is often the signal that you're about to act from truth, not habit. 4. Reduce the noise deliberately. Silence isn't just about removing sound. It's about protecting signal. Audit your inputs. What do you consume the moment you wake up? What notifications interrupt your thoughts? Who do you allow to speak into your life, and why? Covey believed that environment is not neutral. Your surroundings either support your purpose or sabotage it. So make small but powerful shifts. Start your day with your own thoughts, not someone else's. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Designate tech-free zones or hours. Replace passive consumption with reflective writing. Each change makes listening easier, not because life gets quieter, but because you get stronger at filtering what matters. 5. Track alignment, not activity. At the end of your day, don't just ask, what did I do? Ask, how much of what I did reflected who I want to be? That question creates accountability. Because clarity without alignment is wasted insight. You can know what to do and still drift. Not out of laziness, but because you didn't systematize reflection. Covey's principle of self-renewal was rooted in this. You don't grow by chance. You grow by design. And part of that design is silence. The kind that sharpens your awareness. that interrupts automatic behavior, that invites you back into choice. Because that's what this is all about. Not pausing to escape, but pausing to lead. When you create space to hear yourself, you stop outsourcing decisions. You stop relying on others to validate your direction. You begin to lead, not react. And that kind of clarity? It doesn't require a breakthrough. It requires repetition. You don't wait for it. You create it every day. In the first 10 minutes of your morning, in the pause between reaction and reply, in the quiet closing of your day. These are the spaces where your true voice returns. And with it, the answer that's been waiting, not to be discovered, to be remembered. There's a quiet kind of erosion that happens when you ignore what you already know. Not all at once, not in crisis, but slowly, through hesitation, avoidance, and the daily habit of postponing alignment. You tell yourself you're not sure, that you need more time, that you'll decide when it feels right. But deep down, you've already decided. You just haven't followed through. And that gap between what you know and what you practice is where self-trust begins to dissolve. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like distraction. It sounds like, "I'll get to it." It feels like subtle discomfort that you can't quite name, but that lingers. Over time, it becomes harder to hear your own voice. Not because it left, but because you stopped listening. You stopped acting on what it said. And every time you override your own clarity in favor of comfort, you teach yourself something dangerous. That your inside isn't strong enough to act on. That's not harmless. That's not neutral. That's programming. The same way you train your subconscious through aligned action, you also train it through avoidance. And when you delay clarity long enough, you stop believing yourself. Your instincts. You outsource your certainty to noise, to others, to systems, to momentum. Stephen Covey understood this. He didn't teach change through hype. He taught it through integrity. Not public integrity, private. The kind where your behavior matches your values, even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching. Because that's where identity is built. Not in moments of inspiration, but in the quiet decision to honor what you already know. That kind of integrity doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for attention. It simply lives quietly, consistently, through your choices. And when you betray it, you feel it. You might call it fatigue. You might call it lack of motivation. You might call it confusion. But often, it's just the friction of being out of alignment. The longer you stay there, the more it hurts. Not in big, obvious ways. In small ways that compound. You say yes when you meant no. You keep a habit that no longer serves you. You stay in motion instead of making a decision. And then you wonder why you feel off when the answer was always in reach. Not outside. Inside. Covey taught that clarity is a function of principle. And principle doesn't change. It doesn't fluctuate with emotion. It doesn't shift based on pressure. It stays. It waits for you to return. So here's the real question. What have I already decided, but haven't admitted to myself yet? That answer is where your real work begins. Not your hustle. Not your productivity. Your alignment. The gap between knowing and doing isn't a time issue. It's a leadership issue. And leadership begins the moment you stop negotiating with what's clear. There is a cost to hesitation. A cost to avoiding the obvious. A cost to pretending you're unsure. And that cost is your peace. Because clarity doesn't just help you make better decisions, it lets you live the mental weight of pretending you don't already know. So pause. Not to search for more answers, but to return to the ones you've already heard and have been quietly avoiding. Ask yourself, what have I been postponing, not because I'm unclear, but because I don't want to act yet? Where am I calling myself confused when I'm actually just afraid? What would change in my life if I simply acted on what I already know? These aren't emotional questions. They're structural. They define the quality of your relationship with yourself. Because listening isn't passive. It's active. You don't just hear your own wisdom. You honor it. Through decisions. Through boundaries. Through behavior that says, I trust myself enough to move forward. That's the shift most people never make. They stay in the loop, thinking clarity is something to find, rather than something to act on. But the moment you stop chasing more information and start living by what you already know, that's when alignment becomes your default. And when alignment is your default, confidence doesn't need to be forced. It simply emerges because your life finally makes sense with what you value. And that kind of clarity, it doesn't feel exciting. It feels quiet, clean, right? So if something inside you recognized itself in these words, if a truth surfaced, not new, but remembered, then don't rush past it. Make space for it. Subscribe, not for more content, but to stay grounded in what you already know. Real transformation doesn't begin when you learn something new. It begins when you start living what you already know. That's the difference between awareness and alignment. Awareness is knowledge. Alignment is action. And action, repeated with integrity, becomes. Stephen Covey built his entire framework on that principle. Private victory always precedes public victory. In other words, the invisible wins come first. The decision you make in silence. The moment you say no without explanation. The pause before reacting. The daily choice to do what you said you would even when no one's checking. That's how you become congruent. Not all at once, but over time. Because the real work isn't dramatic. It's structural. It's the design of a life that reflects the values you've always held, even when your habits didn't match. But once your habits do match, everything changes. Your mind stops arguing with your conscience. Your actions stop betraying your clarity. Your inner dialogue quiets because there's nothing left to explain. That's the peace most people are chasing without realizing it. Not peace from the world, peace with themselves. And that peace doesn't come from perfection. It comes from consistency. You don't need to be flawless. You need to be aligned. So how do you build that? How do you live what you already know? Start with this truth. Discipline isn't punishment. It's structure for integrity. And when you apply discipline not to force yourself, but to support your clarity, it becomes sustainable. You wake up and act from alignment, not willpower. You make decisions without the emotional tug-of-war. You stop questioning whether you're on the right path because you feel it in your behavior. That's how confidence grows. Not from validation, from coherence. Every time you take action that reflects your truth, your system learns. This is safe. This is who we are now. And the old patterns, the ones rooted in avoidance, overthinking, or performance, begin to fall away. Not because you attacked them, but because you stopped feeding them. You stopped entertaining the idea that you were confused. You stopped pretending that clarity was missing. You started acting, and the new identity formed behind your decisions. This is why Covey emphasized principle-centered living. Because emotions fluctuate, environments shift, but principles remain. When your actions are built on principle, you don't need perfect energy. You just need clarity and structure to support it. So ask yourself daily, does my schedule reflect what I know is important? Do my boundaries reflect what I know I deserve? Does my language reflect what I actually believe? Do my actions reflect what I already value? These aren't productivity questions. They're identity questions. Because your identity is built in motion, but rooted in truth. And the truth? You already know. You've known it in the quiet moments, in the tension before a choice, in the fatigue after saying yes when you meant no, in the ache of staying small when you were ready to expand. That's not doubt. That's your conscience. And your conscience is not a voice of guilt. It's a compass. It doesn't shame you. It guides you. If you listen, and if you live what it says. Because there's only so long you can postpone the truth without paying for it, in your energy, your clarity, and your sense of self. Eventually, the pain of avoidance outweighs the discomfort of change. And that's when you realize you were never confused. You were just resisting what you already knew. But once you accept it, once you stop negotiating with it, you don't need to announce your transformation. You live it. In how you move, in what you protect, in what you stop explaining, in what you choose to stop repeating. That's identity in motion. And it doesn't need applause. It just needs repetition. Because when your life begins to mirror your inner knowing, you don't need permission to lead. You already are. There's something powerful that happens when you stop asking for answers and start living like you already have them. Because you do. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. Enough to take the next step. Enough to choose with integrity. Enough to stop calling yourself confused when you're simply ready for clarity to become action. This is the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but honest. When you realize the real problem was never lack of knowledge, it was the delay in honoring what you already knew. Stephen Covey didn't build his legacy on theory. He built it on principle, on the quiet, daily choice to live from values, not mood. Conscience, not culture. From clarity, not convenience. And that's the invitation you carry now. Not to transform your life overnight, but to return consistently, deliberately to your own truth. That truth may not be exciting. It may not impress anyone, but it will stabilize you. Because the real peace doesn't come from answers. It comes from alignment. From knowing that your decisions reflect your identity. From seeing your actions reinforce your integrity. From feeling your life start to make sense again, because it's no longer contradicting what you value. This is how you rebuild trust in yourself, not by doing everything right, but by doing one thing each day that honors what you already know. And when you do that enough, the noise fades, the tension loosens, the second-guessing slows, because clarity isn't found in the future. It's acted on. The longer you postpone it, the harder it becomes to access, not because it disappeared, but because you distanced yourself from it. But now, you're close again. Close enough to trust it. Close enough to say, without hesitation, I already know, and I'm ready to act like it. Let that be your new baseline. You don't need another plan right now. You need a return to presence, to your center, to your principles, to the decisions that already feel right, because they are. So start there. In your next conversation, in your next yes or no, in the way you manage your time today, in the tone you use when you speak to yourself. You don't have to explain this shift to anyone. You just have to live it. And if this video reminded you of something you've been avoiding, if it helped you reconnect with a part of yourself you've been ignoring, then don't let that clarity evaporate. Tap the like button, not for us, for you, as a quiet commitment to act on what you already know. And if you're ready to keep building a life from the inside out, with less noise, less hesitation, and more direction rooted in principle, watch the next video in this playlist. It's not more content. It's the next layer of your own alignment. Not the loud part, the true part, the one that doesn't just think clearly, but chooses accordingly.